Morning.
Thank you very much. Where's the apple for the teacher? It's amidst the chaos of the left forward. Isn't it beautiful? I mean, this panel will be no exception. We've got, got a good group here. But my name is Sean Sweeney. I work with the Cornell Worker Institute, the Global Labour Institute, as part of the School of Industrial and Labour Relations. I also co-coordinate a project called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. Not completely off topic, but if you get a chance to go to our website, you'll see that there's a group of unions around the world fighting for public control over energy. And so that's my role. We're here to discuss what role unions can have in driving new left electoral initiatives. I'm going to take a global perspective, look at stories from 3 countries, Canada, the US, and Italy. And I just want to frame the discussion with a memory, really. I mean, it was 20 years ago when it was the Social Scholars Conference. I chaired a meeting with Tony Mazzocchi, and we were in the midst of trying to build a Labour Party in the United States. And it was probably, I'm guessing it was around 1994. And some of you are old enough to remember the context, right? NAFTA, which has just been passed. I remember the morning after NAFTA passed, an inebriated Lane Kirkland, president of the AFL-CIO, on C-SPAN, and he was clearly under the influence at like 9 o'clock in the morning. It was a devastating defeat for the trade union movement that went through. And there was a feeling then that, the time for a Labour Party or an independent working class party, time had come in the United States. And there was an impressive group of unions and activists who got together to form that party. But it was not to be. And there's reasons why we don't have time to go into now. But here we are later, and it seems that the traditional workers' parties around the world have been living on lesser evil status for a long time. And it looks like, in the last few years at least, that their day is finally up, or at least there's a precipitous decline of the traditional workers' parties around the planet. And of course, very mixed wherever you go. And we see new parties coming into the picture that represent workers and youth, most notably probably Syriza in Greece, which is doing very, very well electorally. But there are other examples of new formations coming forward. But the discussion today is really going to be focusing a little bit on the role of where is trade union politics in terms of the left and rebuilding the left. Where are they standing? We know in Greece the trade union leadership, for the most part, are still loyal to PASOK, which I understand is like 7, 8, maybe 9% in the opinion polls. Whereas Syriza, which is in the 20s, 24, 25%, maybe higher. There's some union leaders and activists who are going in that direction, but we still have a long way to go. In the US, of course, the labor leadership in the US still pumps hundreds of millions of dollars into the Democratic Party, which is an openly pro-business 1% party. So without sort of prefacing it anymore, I think we should just go into the contributions from the speakers. I'm going to ask Dave Coles to start. Dave Coles is a former president of the Communication, Energy and Paper Workers Union in Canada. A year ago, that union merged with the Canadian Auto Workers and is now a 300,000 member union called Unifor. Dave was, in recent years, has been, or a couple of years ago, was among a group of union leaders who were arrested outside of the Parliament in Ottawa, opposing the Keystone XL pipeline, and along with many Canadian unions and some US unions opposed that project. So we're sort of great to have Dave with us and have us play in that role. So after Dave is going to sort of give an overview of what the Canadian left and Canadian politics and the role of the NDP, and talk about some of the more encouraging initiatives there. After that, we'd like to Eric's going to have to help me get together a replacement. Marcella is going to be doing the translation for Antonio Morandi, who's a journalist and member of the European Secretariat of the Left Labour Federation in Italy, the CGIL. He's also I can't read Eric's writing, but I know he's, perhaps Marcello, you can help us with some more descriptions. But he's, very close to the journal. Is it the name of the journal? The journal.
Yeah, he is in the left platform of the union, which is called Lavoro Società.
Yeah.
So he's a journalist specializing in Eastern Europe and in the problems of labor in Eastern Europe and labor organizations.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Eric. And those of you already know that the Communist Party of Italy sort of disintegrated, and 800,000 members are somewhere, or former members must be somewhere in the Italian left. So there's some really interesting developments there. And lastly, we're going to hear from Deborah Berger, who's the co-president of National Nurses United. Of course, California Nurses Association was one of the very involved with the Labor Party project in the 1990s and supported the NATO campaign in 2000. So that union, it'd be good to hear from Deborah and other folks from NNU in terms of their perspectives on independent politics and the prospects of building a party or not in the United States. So it's really kind of an international forum trying to get a sense of what's possible in this new and rather interesting and volatile period. So I'll hand it over to Dave Coles and get it started.
Great, thanks a lot, Sean. And I really do appreciate you giving up your lunch hour. It's our intention as a panel not just to be talking heads, but to in fact draw from you your opinions and suggestions on the whole issue of trade unions and politics. But before I start, what I'd like to do is give a little bit of a background of my experience. I'm getting to be an old fart, but I will not tell you what's right or wrong. I'll give you my view of what has transpired in Canada and what appears to be transpiring in Canada. Someone asked me this morning when we were sitting outside, so I understand there's shit happening in Canada. The answer is, yeah, there is a lot of it happening, but the jury is out whether it will actually lead to societal structure change. And of course, what they were talking about is, in Quebec, a significant student strike a year ago, a little over a year ago, that put several 100,000 people in the streets day in and day out to defend inexpensive, not free, but inexpensive university education. They were sold out in the end, as the left usually is. But from that, of course, we gained a lot of experience and a significant number of student activists that I think smart trade union leaders went out and hired. I hired personally myself when I was still the president of the CEP, the president of the Canadian Students Federation, and she is now responsible for Unifor's new model of membership, and I'll get to that in a minute. So just to give you an explanation of what happened in Canada, was that a number of us didn't like the direction the labor movement was going in and struggled for a number of years to make change. I came out of what was the left caucus of the labor movement, got sick and tired of complaining and ran for office, knocked off the incumbents, then ran for president and won for president. The CEP was a breakaway union from the International, which is the American unions, and we represented about 140,000 people in the energy sector, forestry, telco, media, mining, and we represented the tar sand workers in Fort McMurray. We were struggling along, not making much progress in trying to institute change in the labor movement. Establishment was very much in bed, with capital, and it took off all the crooks in the U.S. On Wall Street to change things. So in 2008, 9, 10, the Canadian economy took a significant pounding as a result of the financial crisis. Now, by this time, I'm old enough to know that those who fantasized about that's the end of capitalism and things are going to change and it'll be kinder and gentler, and I had various parts of my body beat up before on those types of topics, and we knew that was nonsense. Capital came back with a vengeance. And those who created the crisis were able then to blame workers. And out of that came the Occupy movement and a whole number of things. But it also gave myself and a couple of other labor leaders the opportunity to say, wait a minute, this is not working. We deindustrialized Canada, primarily Ontario and Quebec, but the industrial unions really got hammered. For example, in forestry, Canada's country of trees and mines, we lost about 60% of all of the manufacturing capacity in forestry. Pulp, paper, wood. Happened to be primarily in my union and in the steel workers. The auto workers face the same dilemma. Bankruptcy of General Motors, right? Canada. And we just absolutely got hammered. Now, both unions, both the auto workers and ourselves, had been very active, both in the social movements and in politics. Quite often, not necessarily on the same side, but active. Very active, both unions, in civil politics, municipal stuff. We used that opportunity a couple of years ago to say we had to do something different. And I started an initiative where we put together a group of leaders from both unions and said, if you had to do it again, if you had a clean sheet, how would you build a union? And we did that. And there were enough of us with goodwill, and a lot of our activists and staff had a lot of good ideas. And we took this position that if we were going to do this, never could anyone argue ever that, well, that's the way we did it and argue. If you did that, you were thrown out of the room. So to be heard, to have a voice, we said you couldn't do that and you had to be transparent. So we invited people from outside the labor movement to suggest how you would build a new union. We published on a new webpage everything we did. And we crisscrossed the country talking to our members and to anyone else that would like to participate in the creation of a new union. Now, it's not a year old till Labor Day. And, the jury is out. But we did at least establish a framework, in my opinion. There's lots that disagree, particularly American building trades unions, who openly oppose our direction, that we want to try to do it different, and we wanted to do it to invigorate both the political system in Canada and the labor movement itself. Because the strength of the labor movement, at least in Canada, is that we have infrastructure, we have money, we have networks of strengths that we should be able to utilize to make social change. So we did that, and I think the most significant sort of bold statement we made is that one is on membership. You don't have to have a job or be covered by a collective agreement to be a member. Not an adjunct or associate, a member. And we created what is called community chapters, and it's a tough grind making it happen. Our members who clearly are paying the freight understood it. We campaigned right from the beginning that we were going to look at membership. And we have, one of our local chapters is the Anglican Church practitioners. They're actually trying to bargain a collective agreement with their boss because they get abused. We have chapters of bicycle couriers. Anywhere you have a big organizing drive and you can't get majority, the law may say you can't be members, but why can't you be? Who gives a shit whether you have a collective agreement or not? Why can't you be an active member? So we did that. So that's an experiment. Not sure where it's going to go, but it's creating a lot of discussion and we hope opportunity. So that was one big change. The other significant statement we made is we are going to be active politically. We are going to participate in partisan politics at every level, and we're doing that. And it raises then the question of this forum, the role of the labor movement, structured labor movement, and partisan politics. And I'm not a student of Karl Marx, but I've read a lot, and mostly I forget it because it's dry, boring stuff. But he and Engels and a bunch of others actually did raise a number of these issues a long time ago. And for a bit of a fun, take a look what Karl Marx wrote in 1873. He's trying to answer the anarchists. And he, quite frankly, screwed up big time. Came out against strikes, shouldn't strike for a shorter work week, you shouldn't engage in political politics, you shouldn't do any of this stuff, because what it is a recognition of the illegal state, and that the workers, well, it turned out he changed his position 10 years later, and lots of others did. And one of the professors actually here, David Harvey, has written some really neat stuff about Marxism with labor and political parties. And he gave a lecture in South America, I think in 209, 210, at the Social Forum. It's actually brilliant. And it's easily read, right? It's not like the old stuff. It's not black on white, page after page. You actually can read it and understand it. And, there's a whole number of things that are radically changing in the world. Capitalism is moving very, very fast. Technology is, what you buy today is out of date. And of course, the social network. Dave Cole's at 48. Tweet the hell out of everything. There's more knowledge in 50 seconds coming out of this place than our predecessor, forefathers were able to read in a lifetime. So things are radically changing. And the attack led, not exclusively by your brethren in the United States, but a lot of them, people like the Koch brothers, are attacking anything progressive on an ideological bent. I think it may be the death of them in the end, because they would just want to eliminate anything that has a social context. But if anybody talks about the collective, it's evil and communist, and we all should be killed. Koch brothers, by the way, are now the biggest holders of leased land in the tar sands. Biggest holders, right? In Alberta. The tar sands. This is very serious stuff that's going on. It doesn't mean that there's not rampant capitalists all over the world, except the Americans seem to be the ones that are taking a big liking to Canada right now and are trying to own it or eat it, right? So that leads to, what do we do as a labor movement? In Canada, we have what was designed as a agrarian labor party, the New Democratic Party. It's a social democratic party that flirts, between being really a liberal party and left tendencies, but mainstream. We had elected, which I supported, a leader a guy named Jack Layton, who caught the fancy of a big number of Canadians, just ordinary folk, and we damn near won the last election. Came very close. Dear friend of mine, but he screwed up. He up and died on this, right? And that left the party in a bit of what's that?
The NDP?
Yeah, the NDP, the New Democratic Party of Canada. And it's a liberal party. Of course, you can't run from that. But it's got left tendencies. And the debate was, what role does Labour play in what should be their party? The mainstream political central of the Labour movement, the Canadian Labour Congress, it's a volunteer group, as the AFL-CIO is. You don't have to belong. But its leadership was not activist. This is my opinion. Not activist and not playing a big enough role in electoral politics or, in fact, the Labour movement. So shortly after the creation of Unifor, we took on the leadership of the CLC and actually took every spot from behind, right? Not what I would call the perfect candidate we ran, but change is good. The debate was healthy. We won it not by buses. We won it on the convention floor debating ideas, which is the first time I can ever remember it happening at a Labour Central. We actually won the debate on the floor. And the issue then is, what role should Labour in Canada play in partisan politics? And there's a test taking place in our biggest province in the country, in Ontario, where there was a Liberal minority government that brought forward a few months ago a very a very progressive agenda in a budget, which the Social Democrats voted against and forced an election. And our union and a coalition of others are saying, we'll support the candidates that are incumbents, but we're going to ensure that the right-wing conservatives don't form a government, and we'll try to elect a government that's going to bring forward a progressive budget that includes things like child care and minimum wage increases and a number of those things. So our union is playing an extremely active role in it. We have in the past and are currently very, very involved in civic politics, especially in combination or coalition with the public sector unions, CUPE, which is the Canadian Union of Public Employees. We have elected our own party, which is a coalition party in the city of Vancouver, second largest city in Canada, and are now running a candidate for mayor in the city of Toronto, the biggest city in Canada. So the labor movement is re-engaging in politics, particularly at the civic level, but at the federal and provincial level as well. We have a Tea Party Prime Minister who calls himself a conservative, but he's not. He's a born-again, roll-on-the-ground, right-wing shithead. And we're going to take him on, and our union is playing a huge role. I am going to seek the nomination of in one of the ridings to run federally, and if I get the nomination and get elected, I've told the oil industry that I'm going to become the energy minister, and I'm going to drag those bastards across the table because they won't meet with me. So, I mean, is there a role in labor? Absolutely. Will it be successful? Who knows? But I am not going to go to my grave sitting on my hands. And I think the message is to all of us that we don't have the answers, but doing nothing isn't one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Antonio Morandi from giving the story of state of Italian politics on the left here, and Marcello's going to help. Marcello's going to help with the translation.
Allora, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everybody.
La situazione europea è molto varia e rappresentare il rapporto tra sindacati e politica richiederebbe molto tempo.
So the European situation is very different, and presenting the relationship between the union and politics would require a lot of time.
In pochi minuti possiamo riassumere alcuni elementi di questa realtà per aiutarci a capire meglio quanto sta avvenendo in Europa, che per larga parte è ancora nella crisi economica, sociale, istituzionale senza precedenti, che rimette in discussione il modo di essere e di agire di governi, parlamenti, istituzioni, associazioni.
So in a few minutes, all we can do is to point out some elements of this reality, to help us better understand what is happening in Europe, which is for a large part still in a very serious economic, social and institutional crisis, a crisis unprecedented, which questions the way of being and acting of government, parliaments, institutions and associations.
Le elezioni dei giorni scorsi per il Parlamento europeo confermano le difficoltà della sinistra nei vari paesi di guidare lo scontento e di proporre soluzioni.
The recent elections for the European Parliament confirm the difficulty of the left in the various countries to lead the discontent and to propose solutions.
Solo in Grecia, in Portogallo, in parte in Italia e Slovacchia, la sinistra cresce, altrove è debole e divisa.
Only in a few countries like Greece, Portugal, in part Italy and Slovakia, the left continues to grow. In other places it remains weak and divided.
Per capire il rapporto tra politica e sindacato è necessario intendere la natura e la differenza del ruolo e dei compiti fra questi due protagonisti sociali.
I believe that to understand the relationship between politics and unions, it is necessary to understand the nature and the difference of the role and the difficult task that these two social protagonists have.
I sindacati sono organizzazioni che operano per difendere interessi diretti dei lavoratori, il salario, la sicurezza del posto di lavoro, le condizioni di lavoro, la pratica delle tutele di tutti gli altri diritti sociali e sindacali conquistati.
Unions are organizations that operate to defend the direct interest of the workers, their salary, their social security, the job conditions, the legal practice, and all the other social and working rights that they have conquered over the years.
I lavoratori aderiscono ai sindacati se vedono nell'organizzazione sindacale uno strumento di difesa e di conquista dei loro diritti e di migliori condizioni economiche e di lavoro.
Workers usually join unions if they see in the organizations an instrument of defense and conquest of their rights and an opportunity to improve their job conditions.
Non tutti i sindacati sono adeguati a svolgere questi compiti. Parlando di Europa, in molti dei 28 paesi dell'Unione i sindacati non hanno una storia di battaglie e di conquiste.
Not all unions are apt to carry on these tasks. Speaking about Europe, in many of the 28 countries of the Union, unions do not have, working unions, don't have a history of struggle and victories.
Negli 11 paesi dell'Europa dell'Est non c'è una tradizione di sindacato. Solo negli ultimi anni i sindacati sono liberi e stanno lentamente procedendo alla costruzione della struttura sindacale.
In the left countries of the European East, there is no tradition of union struggle. Only in the last few years, those unions have become a little bit more free and are slowly moving towards the construction of a new union structure.
Parliamo di Ungheria, di Romania, di Bulgaria, della Cechia, della Slovacchia, della Slovenia, dei paesi baltici e della Croazia. Altrove la situazione è decisamente più avanti.
I refer particularly to Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechia, Slovakia, Slovenia, the Baltic countries, and Croatia. In other places, the situation is definitely more advanced.
Ad esempio, nello statuto del mio sindacato italiano, la Confederazione Generale Italiana del Lavoro, che conta 5 milioni e mezzo di aderenti iscritti, si dice testualmente che è un'organizzazione generale di natura programmatica, unitaria, laica, democratica, plurietnica, di donne e di uomini, che promuove la libera associazione e l'autotutela solidale e collettiva delle lavoratrici e dei lavoratori.
For example, the constitution of my union, the CGIL, General Confederation of Italian Labor, which right now counts 5 million and a half of members. That constitution literally says that it is a general organization of programmatic nature, unitary, laic, democratic, multi-ethnic, of men and women, which moves towards the promotion of the free association and the protection, thank you, the protection and collective bargaining of workers, dependent and independent.
Un'organizzazione del lavoro quindi molto ampia e generale.
So it's a union of ample spectrum, very general, very broad.
Per quanto riguarda i partiti,
Now regarding parties, the political parties,
i partiti della sinistra affermano di difendere il lavoro e una visione sociale attraverso il governo delle istituzioni e quindi offrendo soluzioni più generali.
the parties on the left affirm to defend working rights and the social vision through the government or the ruling of institutions, and therefore offering solutions that are more general, more theoretical.
L'adesione ad un partito, non il semplice voto, si pone nella prospettiva medio-lunga, così come i suoi eventuali risultati.
The joining of a party and not just voting for a party is therefore placed in a medium range as its results, its possible results.
È più facile dunque che un lavoratore si renda conto della necessità del sindacato più che del partito.
It's natural, therefore, that a worker considers more necessary a union than a party.
Per questo in ogni paese gli iscritti ai sindacati sono di più degli iscritti ai partiti di sinistra.
In fact, in every country, the members of unions are typically more than the members of a left party.
Tutto questo panorama ha subito forti scossoni negli ultimi anni.
Now, this scenery, this panorama has suffered serious blows in the last few years.
Abbiamo una realtà in continua e rapida evoluzione. La crisi economica e la recessione in Europa hanno accelerato ulteriormente i cambiamenti.
We are dealing with a reality that is continuously and rapidly changing. The economic crisis and the economic recession in Europe have further speed up these changes.
L'aumento delle disuguaglianze, la globalizzazione e la frammentazione delle attività produttive di lavoro, l'incapacità di evoluzione delle strutture sindacali e una diffusa crisi della partecipazione e della democrazia sono gli aspetti più diretti che troviamo oggi.
So some of the most serious and direct aspects which we can face today are the increasing inequality, the globalization and the fragmentation of the job sectors, the inability of unions to change structurally, and a very widespread crisis of popular participation and democracy.
Il sindacato ha valore se viene vissuto come un'organizzazione di tutti i lavoratori e di tutte le lavoratrici, comprendendo quindi, oltre alle storiche figure del lavoro industriale e manifatturiero, i nuovi lavori e le nuove tipologie di lavoro.
The union has value if it is experienced by its members as an organization of all workers, including therefore not just the historic figures of industrial work and manufacturing, but also the new type of jobs and the new sectors of job, trying therefore a development of the whole representation of works.
In questi giorni si è svolto a Berlino il terzo congresso mondiale della Confederazione Internazionale dei Sindacati, la più grande organizzazione sindacale mondiale che raggruppa 325 sindacati di 161 paesi, per un totale di 176 milioni di lavoratrici e lavoratori aderenti.
Just in these few years, there was in Berlin the third Congress, World Congress of the International Confederation of Unions. It is the largest union organization at world level. It includes 325 unions from 161 different countries, with a total of 176 million of members.
A Berlino uno dei temi più discussi è stato quello della disoccupazione e del mancato sviluppo.
One of the most discussed themes at this meeting was that of unemployment and the failed development.
In Europa, se continuano le politiche di austerità e disuguaglianza, non ci può essere sviluppo, occorre creare lavoro perché è l'unica condizione per far ripartire l'economia.
In Europe, if we continue with the politics of austerity and inequality, we cannot have development. We need to create work because this is the only condition to promote economic development.
Le condizioni di lavoro sono drammatiche e nella crisi sono peggiorate, mentre l'unico lavoro che cresce in tanti paesi è quello povero, come ci insegna la tragedia avvenuta pochi giorni fa in Turchia, nella miniera di Soma, o le nuove forme di schiavismo che riemergono nelle campagne.
Working conditions are very dramatic, and with the crisis they've become worse. While the only type of job that continues to grow in many countries is that of poor jobs, as we are reminded by the recent tragedy in Turkey, or the new form of enslavement that happens in different farms all over the countries.
Le politiche delle multinazionali hanno preso il sopravvento su quelle dei paesi e se queste contano di più, un sindacato mondiale non può che decidere qual è la contrattazione mondiale che si contrappone alle politiche delle multinazionali.
The politics of corporation of multinationals have taken over those of the countries, of the single countries. And if these become more important, then a global union cannot but decide what is the negotiation power that it can have to counterpose those the politics of those multinationals.
E allora occorre difendere il diritto di sciopero, rafforzare la contrattazione collettiva e costruire uguaglianza. Sono questi gli strumenti di cui dispone il sindacato.
And therefore we need to defend the right to strike. We need to strengthen the collective bargaining, and build equality. These are the instruments of which a union can make use of.
Risulta evidente che politica e sindacato sono fra loro permeabili, si incontrano e molto spesso diventano complementari.
It's obvious to me that politics and unions are intersect, have mutual interest, and they often they often complement each other.
È stata altrettanto evidente la difficoltà in tutti questi anni di trovare terreni comuni e progetti comuni in Europa. Una sinistra politica frantumata, spesso rinunciataria, troppe volte accondiscendente con governi e potentati economici.
It's also evident to me the difficulty of all these years to find a common ground and common project within Europe. We're dealing with a fragmented political left, often defeated, too often condescending with the politics of government and economic interest.
Per esempio nel mio paese, in Italia, solo recentemente, in queste ultime settimane, si è riusciti a comporre un'alleanza elettorale dei partiti e dei movimenti per l'altra Europa, dove l'impegno su temi concreti come lavoro, scuola, acqua pubblica, beni comuni, lotta alle mafie, parità di genere, diritti dei migranti e dei rifugiati, giustizia sociale sono stati alla base dell'intesa.
Recently in my country, Italy, in these few last weeks, we have been able to form an electoral alliance of several parties for a different Europe, where we are trying to move forward on practical themes, such as the situation of jobs, school, water, common goods, the struggle against the mafia, equality, the rights of immigrants and the political refugees, social justice. These themes were at the basis of our commonality.
Dopo i fallimenti dei piccoli partiti di rifondazione comunista, del Partito dei Comunisti Italiani, è nata SEL, Sinistra, Ecologia e Libertà, ma anche questa esperienza è molto piccola. I Verdi non hanno mai avuto un grande seguito.
After several failures of the small parties tied to the historic Communist Party, it was born CEL, the Sinistra left for ecology and freedom. But this experience is very small and very recent, and the Green Party in Italy has never had a very big following.
La nascita dell'aggregazione Un'altra Europa per Tsipras, dal nome di un leader greco che era candidato alla presidenza dell'Europa, domenica ha avuto un buon risultato elettorale che ci fa sperare bene. Dobbiamo cogliere questa opportunità.
Another example is the birth of another association called the Other Europe for Tsipras, with a name coming from a Greek leader, which just this past Sunday had a very encouraging electoral result and gives good reasons for hope. And we must seize this unique opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Marcella, for the
Last up is, for those of you who came in after the introduction, we've got Deborah, the co-president of National Nurses United in the United States.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I get the dubious honor of talking about labor and politics and the role of labor and left politics in the United States. So how many in the room are union members here? Whoa.
That's unique.
Okay, all right, that's amazing. So are you all thinking that we have a role to play in left politics in the United States?
We're desperately hoping.
Yes, we can.
Okay, well,
See what the WP decides today.
that's interesting, because when I met with Sean and Dave yesterday, it was like, God, I don't really want to be on the panel. I want to actually be in the audience to be told how that's actually going to happen in the United States and get some helpful hints. So it was interesting, and I started thinking about what we could do, and in order to understand where I'm coming from and where National Nurses United is coming from and where California Nurses Association is coming from, it might help to have a little bit of the history of our organization, only because you'll see that we've developed a culture of struggle in our union to actually be heard in our own union. In the 1980s, I was on the California Nurses Association's Economic and General Welfare Council, and we essentially put in 90% of the dues, and we were given as an allowance 10% to run the union arm of the organization, and the managers, educators, and administrators that belonged to the California Nurses Association essentially controlled the organization and the politics and the direction of the union. Some of their politics were advanced, like they did believe in universal health care, but that was one of the few things. I think what brought it to a head was a huge strike that we had in California for the right to honor other people's picket lines, and our vice president at the time crossed the picket line. So there were a number of things that kind of, as you know, it's never easy to unravel a piece of fabric to talk about a story, but one of the things that did help us propel ourselves into deciding to control the union was the fact that we were given the allowance and then told to make do with that for organizing and collective bargaining. So we did take over our union in 1993, and then we got out of the American Association of Registered Nurses, the ANA, and felt that the money that we were sending to the ANA was really essentially cooperating in our dominance. We were subservient to their wishes. In fact, what was really kind of a mixed message for most nurses was the fact that they would endorse Republicans and Democrats alike, equal amounts of money going to both, and they would do dual endorsements and had this culture of just cooperating with every politician that came down the pipe. So you can see why they're still in existence now, because they're an effective tool for speaking as the voice for registered nurses in the United States. And they actually have to deal with National Nurses United because we actually represent more nurses than they purport to represent. So that's kind of our history. But because we were able to take over our organization, and it was a struggle to control that fight and actually win, we've developed a culture of fighting back, and not only fighting back in our organization, but we're one of the few unions that believe that partnerships with your employee and the high road negotiations are really not very effective in accomplishing the things you want to accomplish as an organization, and to speak up for the workers, because it inevitably leads to doing what's right for the boss instead of what's right for our patients and our nurses. And the other thing that we did was we actually changed the direction of our philosophy on what the union was for. Many unions talk about having a union that protects the workers' rights, and we believe that they need to be protected. But the nurses went one step further in saying that not only do we need to protect the rights of the workers in the hospitals, but we also need to respect and take care of and make a priority the rights and protections for all of our patients. And we moved even further out and saying that it's not the responsibility of the nurse to take care of the patients in the hospital, but we need to take care of our community, and we need to take care of our country, and we need to take care of the planet. So we have move forward that agenda, and we are working with various community alliances to do that. Now, we're not in a bubble, and so even though we have great hopes and aspirations for moving forward, we still understand the realities because we deal with death and dying every single day. So we understand how dire it can be in the United States, and it feels good sometimes to have some bad news coming from some other countries, because when you're involved in just the United States, you think this is such a shithole, I've got to move someplace else so that I can deal, sorry, didn't mean to say that, but it feels like that, politically speaking. And so,
I deal with that every day.
so we do understand that we, it is nice to hear sometimes bad news, so that we don't feel like we're the only ones getting beat up, right? So I was supposed to talk about third-party candidates and our issues in the U.S. And so there's been primaries recently. People have done voting recently. How many parties do you actually think are registered? When you got your vote, your card, what Republicans?
One.
Democrats?
Capital.
Okay, capital. But there were also the Libertarians, and there were some other really bizarre groups. I don't want to say bizarre, different groups. But when you come right down to it, it's essentially one party. So what the nurses have done is really try to look at issues, because what happens when you start talking about Republicans and Democrats and other socialist party, all those kind of groups, sometimes you start losing some of your friends on issues, right? They kind of like, whoa, that's a Democratic issue, I don't want to support that, or oh God, that's a Republican issue. We don't usually support them, but there's certain things, you know what I'm saying, that if you start focusing on the politics, you lose friends that would help you further the cause of getting to a certain issue that you want to tackle. And so even when we did the when we endorsed Ralph Nader, it wasn't necessarily the Green Party, but it was because of his principled stand on protecting the community and really speaking out for the little guy, and our relationship with him over the years that made us say that in a really bad election year, when we were going to have to choose between Gore and Bush or Nader, we said, our heart and our loyalty is to Ralph Nader because of the work that he has done. And of course, this was before Al Gore did the wonderful climate change movie and all of that kind of stuff. But we were well served, because if he had been in the same position that Al Gore had been in, he would have actually fought to make sure that he got the votes counted, unlike Mr. Gore, who did not, right? So there are those things that we look at when we're trying to make those decisions. The other thing is that we have endorsed candidates, and it's usually in the Democratic Party. We've sometimes endorsed independent candidates. But again, it gets back to the issues. So when we're campaigning, we're not highlighting the fact that they're Democrat, Republican, and those kinds of things, but we're actually talking about the issues. And that tends to draw the nurses and some of our community members into voting for them because of the issues. They forget all of the party politics. in some respects. I mean, there are diehard people that just vote all Democrat, all Republican, or all Libertarian, or whatever, but sometimes we can even reach our nurses who live in the most conservative districts in California over issues. Staffing ratios was one of them, where we had nurses fighting Arnold Schwarzenegger that had actually voted for him, who were actually speaking out into their communities. We have nurses today that are talking about the disgrace of the Veterans Administration and the care that our vets are getting, and the crappy priority of saying, oh, let's solve it all by getting rid of the head of the VA instead of actually dealing with the problems. And some of those nurses are the most conservative nurses we represent. But because we talk about the issues that mean a lot to them, some of those labels start falling away. And that's where we think that we may have more of an influence in politics by trying to avoid some of those labels where we can. The other thing in California, there are a few cities that have, and counties that have ranked voting, so that it helps answer some of those dilemmas that you have when you're talking about you really want to vote with your heart and the person that you know will represent your interests, but you know that they don't really have a snowball chance in hell of winning, but you'd like to be able to make that statement. So the ranked voting actually happens, and sometimes that little snowball stayed in hell and didn't melt, right? So the thing is that being able to look at politics a little differently and how we prioritize, and having to vote for Dumb and Dumber instead of voting with your heart can make a difference.
Can you explain the ranked voting? I'm not sure everybody.
Okay, in San Francisco and San Francisco City County and in Alameda, they have what's ranked voting. So you actually, and it avoids runoffs, so you actually vote for the first person that you want, and then you vote for, if that person doesn't win, then I want this person and then this person. So you rank up to, I think it's four different candidates running. And then when they tally the ballots, they look at who your next person is, and that vote, if that person loses, then you go to the next person, and that one gets included on their tally. So it helps, one, to cut down election costs for runoff elections that are very expensive, and that's a selling point. And then it does allow candidates that may not necessarily likely prevail, at least get an acknowledgement that there are people out there that support those issues. Given the fact that we can't change our system to a parliamentary or percentage based system, that's one way at least of coming to grips with that. In the 2000s, we also did a clean money campaign in California that was designed to help get money out of politics so that you could have people running that weren't necessarily able to self-fund or be consistently, constantly out there churning the pocketbooks for money to run for office, because we felt that that would be a stabilizing influence. And then, of course, that lost. The only place that it did win was in the county of San Francisco, which already had clean money, and so they were quite familiar with the process. But it did get a dialogue started about the influences of money, and this was way before Citizens United went through. And, you know, it just shows that when we were doing the collection for the signatures, because we had the nurses doing the collection, there was a lot of discussion, and people did understand the corruptive nature of money in politics as far as people having to raise the money and then where their loyalties lie. So the ranked voting, the clean money, and then just looking at issue politics. When we were campaigning for Obama, none of our shirts said CNA or NNU support Obama. What we did was support, at least in theory at the time, his supposed support for a single-payer system or universal health care. So we looked at his policies that he said he supported, and we ran on those as opposed to supporting Obama, which actually worked for us after the election when he, gave over the healthcare reform to the insurance industry. So we could at least say, look, we supported the issues that he ran on, and yes, he betrayed that trust in our mind, but we were then able to go back to our members and say, okay, that did not work, let's go forward on our single payer agenda. So that was a way of dealing with some of that Democrat Republican politics. So all of that is to say that in our union, we have made sure that we want to address the social issues in our communities, and we have made sure that we link all of our activities to bettering our patient care and bettering our environment, which is why we've signed on to the ban for fracking. We are against and opposed to the Keystone Pipeline. We are, I know, and it's really weird because some of our brother unions have really bullied us and harassed us about our position on Keystone. Because they say we don't have any skin in the game, and I beg to differ, but we would benefit greatly by having the Keystone Pipeline, because we would be taking care of more and more and more and more sick patients in our community. And we really don't want that kind of self-imposed disaster. We do not want to be taking care of this. So in that respect, we think that we owe our communities the ability to speak out in politics and take difficult positions and fight for them, because we think that that's the way to change politics. And while we haven't had success, as Sean pointed out, we were at the Labor Party founding convention and we wanted that to happen. And for a number of reasons, it really didn't. But we still are continuing the struggle of trying to make sure that the issues are raised and not necessarily focus on which party is putting forward which, right? So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you to all our presenters, and actually we're going to open it up now we've got about 45 minutes or so for conversation, which is really good. But Dave has asked if you could make a quick response.
A response and a question to our comrade for Italy. One of my notes, as you're speaking, I realize I didn't say, is that in Canada, almost exclusively throughout the labor movement, we strongly support proportional representation and all of its dangers. I mean, we strongly believe that if the anarchists can get 5%, they should get 5% of the seats. Right? A lot of people are fearful that also means the fascists could get 5% of the seats. Like, there is a danger. But my question to our comrade from Italy is, what is the European view now of proportional representation?
Se c'è una posizione
Sì, c'è in tutti i paesi.
So
Non in
I
tutti i
tried.
paesi l'elezione del Parlamento europeo avviene nello stesso modo.
One of the problems is that in Europe, not everywhere the electoral system works in the same way. So in other words, different countries have still different rules about proportional representation and parties representation. Is that what you want to?
Yeah, and those countries that do have proportional representation,
Like
how does it
Italy.
work? Like Italy.
Right.
How does it
So,
work?
nei paesi in cui esiste il sistema proporzionale, come funziona?
Voglio dire, era la prima parte che ti ho detto, voglio continuare. Per esempio in Italia, in Germania e in alcuni paesi, Romania, c'è lo sbarramento del 4%.
Okay, so in some countries like Italy,
Germany and Romania, Polonia,
Poland.
un partito che non raggiunge il 4%
So if a
non è
party
rappresentato in
if a party
Parlamento.
does not reach at least 4%, cannot be represented in the parliament, the European Parliament.
4%.
4% is you are out.
In Irlanda questa soglia è al 3%.
In Ireland, though, goes down to 3%.
In tutti gli altri paesi è proporzionale pura.
In all the other countries is purely, completely proportional. So if it's 2%, it's 2%. Everybody gets represented.
Can I suggest, although it's a very interesting discussion on PR, I think we should maybe give the audience a chance
Yes.
now to come in and comment on the three presentations, just give some views. Please introduce yourself when you speak. Keep your comments short. I'm going to make this kind of sign if I feel that you're going on a little bit too long, but we should have plenty of time for conversation. So can I get Treon in the back first, and the sister here, Comrie there in the second row.
Well, this is actually a question, I think, addressed to the Assembly here. We had some traction for the Labor Party in Vermont, and that's reflected today in the fact that we still have a viable third party.
Could you stand?
We have a viable third party, the Progressive Party, which has some senators and reps in the legislature, and they generally play a positive role, particularly their role, I think, is pressuring the Democrats. So we're able to actually win some things in Vermont which you can't win anywhere else in the United States.
What's the name of the party?
What?
The name of the party?
The Vermont Progressive Party.
Okay.
It's small, it's less significant, I think, than, for example, Quebec Solidaire, but it can actually win, elections. And what actually powers the change in Vermont really is the social movements. But my question is really, because there's real limitations to this kind of a party, and we're the most successful in the country, quite frankly, at least pragmatically in terms of electing people. We had some real movement for a Labor Party. I understand that's not in the offing. When I was Secretary Treasurer of the Vermont AFL-CIO, I know the limitations of our labor movement. But I'd very much like to know whether people think it would be useful or possible to recreate something like Labor Party advocates, so we actually have an organized network pushing within labor and within alt labor and with the broader kind of working class movement, which is constituting itself in the United States, which is, I think, will take place, much of it outside of the institutional labor movement. Do we think it's useful to have a network or an instrument like Labor Party advocates reforming?
There's a comrade there in the white t-shirt. And then we have actually, before you start, we have Mark Dudzik here, who's the former national organizer of the Labour Party. And maybe he might want to come into the conversation and respond to what Trayvon just said later on in the conversation. But
Should
comrade,
we go
we're
around?
going to take a few more contributions before Mark comes in, but that's something we'd like to address.
I really agree with what you're saying. My name is Jess Beer. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. I'm also the organizing director for 15 Now, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a grassroots organization that has helped to lead the way in Seattle to win a $15 an hour minimum wage. I agree that we need to have advocates for a Labor Party, for a Workers' Party, for an independent party on the left. But one thing I think that can really put it on the map is victories of independent working class representation. Who here is familiar with Shama Sawant, the first socialist elected in Seattle in 100 years? Who here is familiar with 15 Now and winning a $15 an hour minimum wage? So a good number of you. One thing that electing Shema Sawant showed a lot of labor unions in Seattle and showed unions, I think, across the country and people across the country is that it's possible to win to the left of the Democratic Party. And in Seattle and in Washington State, it's controlled by the Democratic Party, but we have the most aggressive taxes, and there's just massive corporate tax handouts. In fact, the historic $8.7 billion was just handed to Boeing, which promised they wouldn't leave the state, but they still are letting jobs go. And the reason I raise this is because I really agree with the sister that issues matter to working people. The platform, the program is really what wins people over to a candidate. But it isn't so much the issues and whether the candidate supports it, but how is that candidate going to fight for those issues? Are they really going to advance those issues and use their position to build a movement, to get more working people active to fight for those issues? And I say that in the context of electing Shema Sawant last year. She got elected this past November. 6 months later, her top demand was a $15 an hour minimum wage. 6 months later, we've won a $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle. And this not only, this is terrific. This not only shows that we can elect independent working class candidates that are socialists and open about being socialists, but that socialists fight for these issues and build a movement of working people and revive those traditions of working people being involved in movements. And I raise this right now because we are running a second election campaign in Washington State, taking on Frank Chop, the Democratic House Speaker, who's led the way to give Boeing that $8.7 billion and has, cut $10 billion from social services since the recession. There's an anger in Washington State. But we call on unions to really support these independent campaigns, not only because they stand for these issues, but how they fight for the issues. I'm actually the person that's going to be running against the House Speaker. I was an organizer with 15 Now, and I ask everybody here to get involved in the campaign and support it, because though it's in Washington, though it's a legislative district in Seattle, winning a second seat this 2 years, in a row, shows people that it's not a flash in the pan, that it's something that demonstrates that there's a hunger on the left for an alternative. Not just for people that are progressive, but for working class people that want to see their issues advance, that are tired of the handouts to the big corporations. So I invite everybody to get involved with that campaign.
Good luck, Jess. Another in the back row there. And anybody on this side?
Well, I really enjoy hearing from people from other countries and a little less depressed. A couple of you said you really wish you could hear other people's answers. I actually have a proposal. And I really think the capitalist agenda has been unrestricted trade in the free flow of capital. And I think that the only solutions for labor unions and for working people is an agenda of fair trade. Because if we can push for fair trade, we can push for fair labor standards around the world. We can push for environmental standards around the world. We can push for product standards around the world. And those will be the only things that will protect American workers. I like the 15 Now. I like all the local issues. But one thing that can unify a global working class and a global labor movement is the idea of fair trade. So I'd like to throw that out.
Thank you for that. Sister in the back over there. Do you
my-
want to stand in so we can hear you?
Hello, my name is Erin, and I think I am probably unique in the room in that I'm a member of a building trades union, specifically the United Association, speaking of the Keystone Pipeline. And I was wondering...
Use a plumber.
Yeah! But I was wondering if people had any experience when you are very separate from the politics of your union as a whole, and how to speak as a minority voice and maybe gain some traction or something.
To Dave and Deborah afterwards. Yeah. Okay, Heather here in the second row. Dennis in the back, and then Eric.
Well, my name is Frank Deborah. I'm from Germany. And it might be interesting for you to hear if you have some information about what's referring to the subject, what's happening in Germany. Might encourage you slightly. We have a party of the left in Germany, and this party has a history, a complicated history, but it has been stabilized in the last elections, even in the European election, with about 8% and the representation in Parliament and the European Parliament. The formation of the party of the left was a kind of coalition of coming together of the tradition of old East German state party, and trade unionists, left-wing trade unionists in West Germany, leaving the Social Democratic Party. Amongst them was the former president of the Social Democratic Party, Oskar Lafontaine, who was a very prominent left-wing personality in Germany, and they built the party together, which is very complicated. I can't go into details, but the German unions, which play a special role, are still, some say they are still quite strong unions because they have a strong position at the working place by the legal of the workers' councils, etc. But this is also a base for rather conservative and cooperative tendencies within the German trade union movement. But we have your experience. We have new fields for the reorganizing of trade union politics, for the learning of how to fight, developing new methods and new strategies for strikes in the services sector, in the education sector, especially in the health sector, etc. And we still have a weaker fraction in the metal workers union, which from the top has gone more and more to the right, cooperative politics. But there is still a sort of tradition of thinking in class categories and class autonomy, defining trade union politics. And so far, it's quite encouraging. It's not really solving the problems, but you might listen to the president of this party, Bernd Rixinger, who is here, and he'll speak at 3 o'clock, and he's a trade union comrade. At 2 o'clock.
With Savant.
At 2 o'clock he will speak, and he's a trade union comrade, and is a president of the party, and he's doing a good job working on all these complicated problems which exist within the party, and he has the experience in the new trade union movement, organizing nurses and leading them to strikes, etc. So within the global perspective, I never say that Germany offers many positive perspectives, but in this field, it is, for the global perspective, rather positive.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, just to interject quickly, I met Bernd 2 days ago,
Yes.
and what's impressive about it is that, the capacity to recreate and rethink ideas, but also, parties that are coming and going, like getting 10, 15, 20%, then disappear the next year. With the Linke, it's been stable now for a long time, and I think it's a very, very inspiring example. Dennis, another building trades member. And so
my name is Dennis Hart. I'm an iron worker, local 40, and I'm here volunteering with Food and Water Watch and the Green Party, both of whom are represented in this room. It's a question, it's kind of vague, but it's for our neighbor to the north. You spoke about kind of being sort of butting heads with the construction trades, the American building trades, and I've seen that as well. Can you give us a little more perspective on that, and maybe some, if you have ideas about how to work on that, how to counteract that, how to make it like values-based instead of just purely interest-based?
Can we come back to that maybe in a few minutes?
Yeah.
Do you want?
And then if you can,
I just want to get, there will be time, we'll have some summing up time if we can get.
I'll put that
and if you can point me in the direction of any sort of resources, I'm going to be asking this question every panel I'm at this weekend, but any sort of resources on how to work on that, if any scholars or speeches or anything that I can kind of go to school on that.
Yep, okay.
And then go to war.
Great, I got Eric, Food and Water Watch there, and then.
Oh, and there's flyers on the table about a Green Party after party for our governor, New York State gubernatorial candidate tonight, who's here in the room.
I hope Howie gets into the conversation a little while too. So I've seen some hands here. I've got Eric Weltman, Brian Caloris, Al Reinrods. You know everybody. Actually, I'm going to have to try to mix it up a little bit. And John from the front.
So my name is Eric Weltman. Again, I work with Food and Water Watch, and at least in theory, I think it's worth noting that parties are institutions that should have the capacity and the ability and the authority to hold elected officials accountable. I think it's maybe an obvious point, but all too often we pin our hopes on a particular candidate who, at least at the outset, may appear to be progressive and champion progressive issues, but then come to disappoint us. And I say in theory because I lived in Massachusetts for 15 years, where I was part of a failed effort to try to get the Democratic Party to hold its elected officials accountable to the Democratic Party platform. Sort of a novel idea, but the platform, not surprisingly, was primarily instigated by progressives, so support single-payer health care and all kinds of progressive things. But most of the state legislators really probably had never even seen the platform. So at any rate, the point being that I think that, again, at least in theory, parties should have the capacity to hold elected officials accountable. I think that's one reason why there are institutions that have value in their own right. But again, in practice, as often is the case, parties really have not much interest or authority or capacity to really hold their electeds accountable.
Thanks for that, Harry. Brian, and then Al Weinreb, then John.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think the question Trayvon raised at the beginning is a really important one. Like, what types of steps can we be making right now to get that sort of mass working class party that we need? I think we do need a new party of the 99%, but I think a lot has changed. I was active in the Labor Party in the 90s as well. A lot has changed between now and then. For instance, OCAL and PACE don't exist, and those were the unions that were at the forefront of the Labor Party. The unions have gotten their butts kicked over and over again since then, but actually it would seem like it's a contradiction or whatever, but I think the opening for class politics is far bigger now than it was in the 1990s, right? We saw that with Occupy, with the way the message of the 99% resonated, and then we're seeing that with the way the message of Fight for 15 has already resonated, and I think will dramatically increase in the next year, and we saw that in a more specific way with Shama getting elected. So one thing I think that should be explored is running, not just looking, should we support this party or this candidate or whatever, but running independent candidates from the union. Shama Sawant was a union activist that sort of pulled a lot of the labor leaders kicking and screaming to finally support her in the end, but running union activists that we think can be viable candidates. And I think what NNU has done with the Main Street Contract for America could be a model of the type of platform that could be brought more, maybe bringing Fight for 15 to the forefront, and people that are also connected to movements on the ground. And I think 15 now has a big potential coming out of this. I don't know if folks realize that, but on Monday they're going to vote on 15. It's not exactly what we want, but it's the most dramatic wage increase in the country carried out. Oh, in Seattle, I'm sorry. In Seattle City Council.
We don't live there. We don't live there.
Right, they're gonna implement a $15 an hour minimum wage, right? There's phase-ins, there's some exemptions, etc. But I think that's gonna be a dramatic victory that's gonna send, shockwaves and also give organizing power to struggles on the ground. So being connected to those movements, right? Shama Sawant didn't come up with the demand for a $15 an hour minimum wage. The workers who went on strike came up with the demand for a $15 an hour minimum wage. And connecting those and running independent candidates now, I think, can be a key opening, like Jess's campaign, a key opening that we can take advantage of for the struggles in the future. If you want to donate to Jess's campaign, you can do that here.
All right, I got Al Weinreb over here from Delaware, and then John, and then the brother at the back in green, and if we got another woman who wants to come into the conversation, I'd like to, please indicate now. All right, go ahead, Al.
I remember the Auto Workers Union, Al Weinreb from California. First, I just wanted to say both to Unifor and to the National Nurses United that their stance around the climate issue has been really just overwhelmingly wonderful about taking on those issues that basically none of us are going to be here in 20 years if we don't have that type of advocacy. But we've spoken a lot about how the political process is so corrupted by money and the power that exists now, and we haven't talked that much about how the union movement itself has been corrupted sort of in that same way. And I thought it'd be interesting to get some perspectives from you about how to create a bigger opening within the union movement for the perspectives that you folks are putting out. I know it's a big battle, but it would be helpful probably to us to hear your sense of what both the U.S. and the Canadian labor movement look like and how we can make inroads to try to move it politically in a direction of addressing the issues you're talking about.
Thanks for that, Al. Before I call on John, our next speaker, I'd like to take Chair's privilege to announce Solidarity for Survival, Social Union Approaches to Environmental and Climate Justice. One of the issues we're going to take on tomorrow morning, it's at 10 o'clock, session 1, is the sort of the emerging divisions in the labor movement around climate and environmental issues, and how it's tied up to a much bigger conflict of vision over which way we want to go towards social movement, unionism, build a progressive independent left, or go basically even ultra collaborative stance with the fossil fuel industry and the other big corporations. So we're going to be taking on that issue in the context of the climate crisis tomorrow morning. John, I'm going to call on you. You're next brother after John. Okay, I'm happy.
Yeah, John Flanders, a retired member of the Machinist Union. It's more of a question, I guess, I want to throw out there. Travin talked about, well, let's rebuild Labor Party advocates. My question, after seeing most recently what's going on in the Working Families Party, the role the unions played in that, is can we have a viable workers' party that is run by labor internationals who have a very narrow agenda and, you know, always veer to the right and all the rest of it? What kind of a structure would such a working class party have where you know, a small handful of people, in the example of my machinist union, we just had an insurgent campaign I supported, but the overall turnout was 10%, and so the international leadership was reelected with a margin, maybe 7% of the membership actually voted for them. And this is often the situation with international unions, that the leadership gets into office by hook and by crook, by doing the usual, you know, ass-kissing routine all the way up. Do we want a Labor Party run by people like that? I wouldn't want to run by my union leadership. Anyway, I want to put that out there, and when we think about, you know, do we need a workers' party, what kind of workers' party would it be?
I'm going to take a few more contributions before we go back to the panel. Before the brother in the green shirt at the back comes in, is there a woman comrade who would like to come into the conversation at this point, or like to indicate that they want to be in it? Yes, can I take, would you mind, brother? No. Taking the sister first.
Hi, my name is Elise. I'm from 1199 SEIU, and I think that's a really good example of how you don't want labor controlling the development of a working people's party, because I think we're really talking about working peoples, because if we're talking about this country, the vast majority of people are not trade union members, though they're workers. I think that we have to be very careful, because labor at this point is as poorly organized as it's ever been in the 40 years that I've been a labor activist. I think that we who are in labor unions, with very few exceptions, have to go back and rebuild the labor unions. I think one of the things that happens with even an ostensibly progressive labor union is they are allowed to make these types of decisions because they don't have an active base that really understands and is looking to the fact that these are the people that are going to tell them what's in their best interest. And until you build real labor activists within the trade union movement, you're never going to be able to hold a leadership accountable, even a leadership that can be very progressive on some issues and very reactionary on other issues.
What's your name, sister?
Elise.
Elise. Okay. Can I just go to the comrade in the back, because he's been waiting, and then I'll go back.
Gene Ruskin. Well, I think this really speaks to partly what I was going to say. I think we're totally fooling ourselves if we think in the foreseeable future the U.S. labor movement has the possibility of leading a left party in this country. I think we're talking about a working class party, a working people's party, probably more like a rainbow coalition concept, where the future of a movement in this country has to be a social movement with low-wage workers, with immigrant workers, the kind of thing that is happening with Reverend Barber in North Carolina, you know, with large African-American voter rights, all that sort of broad issues, the environmental movement. And if we try to reform anything like labor advocates, which had a really important role to play, I think it'd be a total disaster. And that we shouldn't talk about it that way anymore, because we've seen what our unions can and can't do, and it's just not realistic. On the other hand, I feel like there is a moment now where the politics of this country are being reframed, and the insurgent parts of the labor movement, whether it's CTU and they're doing some independent political action there, whether it's a kind of role that NNU has played, those parts of the labor movement in coalition with African-American movements and immigrant rights movements, that is a place to begin to develop independent political action. But we shouldn't try to reduplicate something that was important in another moment.
question. I'm going to call on Marcella wants to make a comment, and then I'd like to ask if maybe Howie and Mark Dudzig, who've been around these movements for a while, if they want to make a comment before we go to the panel, if that's okay. So Marcella, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm not, a real translator. I'm just helping out. I'm actually an historian, focusing mostly on labor unions and radical movements. And I was really struck by the three presentation in the sense that we kind of heard three very different stories of three different approaches to labor unions and kind of like three different models. You spoke about creating a new model, a new organization out of one that's basically not longer serving the interest of Canadian workers. You talked about really working on the fringe of a larger movement and kind of position to that. And then Antonio kind of talked about the more traditional historic role of the union. And so the question I have for all of you is, what do you believe is the major strength in your organization, and what's the main weakness? In other words, what do we, what's really that your particular organization can contribute to, when we are looking at them, and what remains problematic?
I'm going to give the speakers a chance in a few minutes to come back as we close out. I want to take the brother here in the blue shirt, and I'm not sure, Howie, did you want to come into the conversation, and then Mark, you want to say something, and then we'll go back to the front table. Brother here.
Just in agreement with the gentleman, one of the things I teach, I'm a New York City high school teacher in a public school, but it's a trade school. It's a public trade school. And I'm also happy to be the chapter leader for the school, just newly elected, but I was doing chapter leader for about 9 years in another school. One of the issues that I seem to have, and I agree, is that there's also no awareness. Young people, and labor needs young people to support them to aspire to be labor people. I've been a chapter leader since I was about 27. Everywhere I went, I was the youngest person in the room. Mm-hmm. And then when I teach, I'm a social studies teacher. I can use the Haymakers Affair to teach about labor union and the significance of labor unions. But they only get that in a small 3 or 4 week window where it should be taught. But I think unions should take this up, where they should build some kind of awareness campaign, because young people right now don't see the significance of a labor union. $15 now, it seems to be the closest thing to the awareness that they should be getting, because that was the labor union's goal back in the day. I mean, if you go into labor union, $15 a minimum will be pretty much a minimum back in the 70s. We're now in 2014, and we're aspiring for $15 minimum wage, which is, I don't know if that's, that's a wonderful campaign. I love it. And for my community, which is the poorest in the nation, I'm in the 16th district in the South Bronx, that'll be fabulous for my community. However, we should be aspiring for unions should be coming in and just awareness campaigns. Just like corporations are doing with public schools and they're funding, all sorts of public institutions, unions should be doing the same to build this awareness.
Good point, bro. Good point, guys. Howie, Green Party candidate for New York State, New York River. Would you mind standing?
Sure. I think we're in a really interesting situation. You may have heard of these 2 polls in the last month where an unnamed Working Families Party candidate gets 24% in one poll and 22% of the vote before they even campaign. Well, I'm a working Teamster with a name, Howie Hawkins. So I think that those polls may say a lot about the potential for this campaign. And one of the interesting things is whether it's pollsters or it's media or the political officers, the ones that deal with political campaigns of the organized labor, as a working person, it's like, I don't count. I work a night shift. It's like, you're not going to get anything done. Actually, I ran in 2010. There were 7 candidates that came in third. I'm getting a little more respect from those quarters. But I think my experience as a candidate is what average working people feel when they look at politics. They see these Democrats and Republicans in suits, and it's like, they're not about us. They don't know me. They don't know my life. They don't care about me. I'm not voting. Majority of working people in the United States do not even vote. So it is about issues, but it's also about our identity and our sense of who we are and what we can do and our power and our knowledge. You go door to door, and a lot of people, they're a bit mystified by politics. They just know it's not about them. They're not bothering with it. So people move not just by their brains, by the issues, but by their guts. So for me, this campaign is not just about the issues. It's about building a party in which working class people can sit down, think things through for themselves, make their own decisions, and go out and act. In other words, and be a place where people can feel empowered. So we're not just mobilizing the average liberal left kind of group now. You know, they send you e-blast, sign this online petition, show up at this demo, show up and talk about the issues, but they really don't want you to talk. They want to tell you what to do. Aaron Gupta had a great article on the Fight for 15, and this worker who went there said we were babied by the people that brought us to Chicago and flew us there. I think that's the experience working people have. So for me, we got to constitute a party that's about organizing, not just mobilizing, bringing people together so they can think for themselves and act for themselves. And then how that relates to the unions, I think the party's got to lead the labor movement, because the institutionalized labor movement, for all the reasons we know, they're looking out for their members, not the whole class, not the whole community, not the planet. For the most part, you know, nurses are an exception. So I think, you know, we got to really build a party of working people. And so that would be my thoughts on hearing what's been said here. And I know Mark says we need 10% of the unions before we get a Labor Party back. I think maybe what we need is independent left candidates, working people getting 10% of the vote. And then the union's going to say, whoa, we better get involved with that.
I think I'm going to give the last word to Mark. He's got his hand up. Mark is the former national organizer of the Labour Party.
Yeah, well, we published a brief history and kind of analysis of the Labour Party experience about a year ago. It's called Labour Party Time Not Yet. You can find it on thelabourparty.org. And there's been a few other articles about it, and I really appreciate this discussion because I think this is a time when these issues are really coming forward again. The short answer of what happens to the Labor Party is you can't have a party of labor when the labor movement itself is in disarray and retreat, and that's what happened. We kind of rode a very brief moment of revival in the U.S. labor movement in the mid-1990s. Sean kind of set the tone when he opened this up to sort of break with the Democrats after 12 years of Reaganism. We end up with this guy Bill Clinton, who immediately moves to ratify a globalization agreement and eliminate welfare benefits for the poorest parts of the working class, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was this moment where labor began to wake up. There was what looked like an insurgency that took over the AFL-CIO in 1995. We were going to organize 1 million new workers a year. That was the vision. We thought we could do it. And, in that context, the idea that in addition to, rebuilding a labor movement, that we would begin to build an independent political expression for the working class was very real and very exciting, and that was sort of the Labor Party experience. And we put it on the shelf at a time, when that movement had suffered a strategic defeat sometime in the early years of the 2000s, and we could no longer credibly claim that we represented any kind of a significant section of the institutional labor movement. We kind of fell below that 10% number. So, and we're kind of struggling with where we can go. I would submit that from what I know of the Seattle experience, that's kind of a local experience with the same thing. There's a revitalized movement that began to develop its own political expression, and I think that those are the kind of things that we have to really think about when we think about how to rebuild a labor movement. I think that to try to reconstitute a Labor Party advocate type structure in the absence of a broader movement, I think the danger would be that it would devolve into sort of a sterile debating society. It's really got to be connected to those kind of movements. And I do agree that I think given the evolution of labor over the past 20 years, that any new initiatives have to be more than the traditional institutional labor movement. I think that that movement to a large degree has been hollowed out both in terms of internal democracy, the kind of unions that I came out of, oil, chemical, atomic workers, and a lot of those unions no longer exist in the dynamic internal lives that they had into the 1990s, and also in terms of its ability to speak on behalf of the broad working class. So I think that that's sort of creating a different dynamic right now, but I do think that this really is a time to begin to discuss and debate those issues again. I think that all of these things are coming together. I think you need, a significant section of an institutional labor movement to rebuild that movement. I see new leadership emerging in a number of national unions. The nurses have been there. There's new leadership in the Amalgamated Transit Union that sees the fight for public transit as part of a broader fight for public goods. The new leadership in the Postal Workers Union with a similar kind of a vision. And I think that, to connect that with these broader movements might really create some interesting discussion. And we need more of these kind of structured and responsible debates about how to move forward.
Thank you very much. For those of you who didn't get a chance to speak, we have like 7 minutes, so I'm going to do it in reverse order, if that's all right. Deborah, would you like to give a couple of comments?
We're sorry,
You weren't ready for that. You weren't ready for that, were you?
No, I wasn't.
Do you want to pass and ask Dave to respond to something? Or,
yeah, let him do it.
All right, good.
A whole number of questions. I'll try to prioritize it. The sister Elise has nailed it. You have to be an activist first. And to the sister that asked from the building trades, how do you survive in a right-wing union? Well, that's where I came from. I came from the paper workers, right? I took over my local union. I was a young chap who out-organized the old farts and became the local president and became an advocate for bargaining issues of our members. Your union has to take care of you, or at least recognize you, if you take care of workers. So that's how I started, and you can survive in an ultra-right-wing union by being an activist and actually working. I get sick and tired of the debating club, I'm always leery to participate in these kinds of issues, except I'm always, I was in Chicago Labor Notes, I run headlong into activists, and that's what inspires me. I think it doesn't matter how old you are, somebody younger is coming up with an idea that you think is crazy. They need their space. And if we don't allow young workers, whether they're in a union or not, to exercise their thought and their activism, we're missing a golden opportunity. The workers' strike, the student strike in Quebec was very, very instrumental in allowing my union to say, wait a minute, young people have got something to say, and we may not agree with it, but let's hear it and have that discussion. And they know how to organize, and they're activists. The building trades are not a union in Canada. They are an agent for the employer, they're a hiring hall. But that doesn't mean that there is not some really great activists coming out of the building trades in Canada. They're arguing internally that the numbers are all wrong around these pipelines, by the way. They're not job creators, they're job killers. So you argue that with your members on the shop floor. When the leadership of your union says, well, they create jobs, you call bullshit and you do it by fact. There is, in my opinion, from an outsider, from 35,000 feet, there is a number of leaders in the U.S. that are desperately trying to change the labor movement. I think of my comrade friend Larry Cohen. I think of John Geenan and the Steelworkers, like Willie Adams in ILWU. Now, some would argue they're yelling in a hollow drum, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's something happening worldwide. It may not necessarily be good when it comes out. Now, the question the sister asked, and I'll get to it very quickly and pass it on. What are the strengths of the experiment in Canada? The strength is that we're trying something absolutely outside the box and different. The jury is out. What is the weakness of it? it is not institutionalized, it's leadership driven. It's a number of people that by coincidence, happenstance, I don't know what, came together that are prepared to drive this. Quite frankly, we drove it over and through our membership in total consultation with them, but they didn't come up to this idea on their own. A number of us just drove the frickin' tank out of frustration. So the weakness would be is if we don't institutionalize the left, the activism in the organization, and the leadership either gets wiped out or grows old and passes on. So that would be quite frankly, our new president, Jerry Dias, I mean, Lord help us if he gets run over by a bus, because this thing now, along with myself and others, is quite clearly personality driven. It's what the right did to us. It's grassroots guys and gals that really have the ability to communicate. So that's our strength and that's our weakness.
Great. Thanks for that, Dave. Antonio and Marcello?
2 minuti di orologio.
2 minutes.
Il principale problema che ha l'Europa e l'Italia oggi si chiama mancanza di lavoro.
The main problem that we have in Italy and in Europe overall is lack of jobs, unemployment.
Noi abbiamo 26 milioni di disoccupati ufficiali
We have 26 millions of official unemployed
e milioni di giovani che hanno lavori temporari e precari.
and millions of youth who only have jobs that they are temporary.
Solo 2 esempi. La ricca Germania ha 6 milioni di giovani con contratti mini job.
Even Germany has 6 million of youth who have contract that they are precarious and temporary.
E questi giovani non hanno la previdenza sociale, la protezione
And
sociale.
they have no benefits.
Secondo esempio, in Italia abbiamo 3 milioni di giovani senza lavoro
In Italy we have 3 million of young people without a job
e 3 milioni di giovani che non hanno scuola, non hanno lavoro, non hanno formazione.
and 3 million of youth who also don't have schools, don't have any type of trade formation and education.
Quindi la prima battaglia del sindacato
So
e dei
for-
partiti della sinistra italiana
So for us, the first struggle of our union and our parties,
è per un piano straordinario New Deal per il lavoro.
it's an extraordinary plan, a new deal, if you want, for work, for employment.
Ne parleremo oggi pomeriggio nel
And
panel
this will be the
dedicato a
focus
questo.
of his panel at 3 o'clock.
Grazie.
So 3 o'clock panel invitations there. Thank you.
Which 3 o'clock?
Actually, I don't have it in front of me, so they refer to a panel at 3 o'clock where they're taking a position on European left. Eric?
On the crisis, austerity,
I'm sure you all got your brochure. Deborah, do you want a
Okay,
word?
so one of the questions that I thought was really good and started me thinking about what the strengths and weaknesses of trying to move unions forward, and especially our union, was the fact that there's internal factors that cause strength and weakness, and then the external factors of strength and weakness. And internally, we've done a lot of member education. We don't do nurse education on nurse subjects. We title nurse subjects and then talk about the environment and politics and those kinds of things. So we get nurses in by talking about a few things that might be near and dear to them, like charting protectively and things like that, but then swing them into talking about the technology of computer charting and the replacement of nurses' clinical judgment with technology. And so doing the education helps our members be more outspoken about the pipeline and fracking and technology and those kinds of things. Then also looking at our budget, our strength is looking at our budget and saying, what are our priorities? What do we want to accomplish? And then making our budget reflect those priorities. Like we just appointed Fernando here to be the Director for Environmental Climate Change and Justice. So it's one of those things that said, yes, we understand this is a crisis and we can't have all of these other areas doing double duty, and we need to make sure that it looks like it's a priority for us. So that was one of the things that we've done. Then as far as utilizing our members, making sure that whenever we have large gatherings, we don't just have a convention where we have the meetings and the echo chamber debates and all of this kind of stuff, but we do have even more education for our members there about the issues that mean a lot to them. And we take the opportunity to use the 1,000 nurses at an event, or the 100 nurses at an event, to always have an action that we are doing at every single meeting that we have. When we have 100 nurses, there's an action there planned into the agenda of education, so that nurses are learning how to be more out there and use their voices for social change. For the external weaknesses that we are dealing with is the moving of our patients from the hospital setting to lesser regulated areas like clinics and surgery centers and things like that, so the companies save money. The other thing is technology is a huge, huge, huge issue for us, because it tries to replace the clinical judgment of the nurse or the healthcare provider with pre-programmed care paths that really say every one of you is a widget on this assembly line, and it's assembly line medicine. So some of those are the other things. And then another internal weakness that we have to deal with is trying to win the hearts and minds of the younger nurses that love the technology, that have their little iPads, their little apps that, you know, do this and that for them and help calculate things, and trying to get them to be aware that yes, technology is helpful, but we still need to use the old-fashioned, you know, really looking. So trying to get nurses to look at that is another issue. And I'd imagine it's the same in a lot of the trades and professions as well.
Thank you, our speakers. Really, really rich, diverse panel, and I think, and also to the audience for being respecting each other, listening to each other, and participating in such a good discussion. Last thing I would say is that please mark on your calendars September 20 or 21, the People's Climate March in New York City. I have to say, I've been organizing in New York for 25, 30 years. I've never seen such enthusiasm for a major demonstration. There's going to be union. If you're in a union, you want to be involved. June 12th, 9 a.m., 11:99, a planning meeting. You're invited to attend. Let me know if you want to give me your email, and I can get you a formal invitation. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.